I think when it comes to Witcher 4, it has a huge problem. And for years, fans have been asking the same question: can The Witcher survive without Geralt? It is a fair question because after all, Geralt isn't just another video game protagonist. For nearly 2 decades he has been the face of the franchise, and when the people hear the word Witcher, they don't think about Ciri and they don't think about Kaer Morhen, they often think about Geralt. But after looking at the discussion surrounding The Witcher 4, I've come to a different conclusion. Replacing Geralt isn't the biggest problem facing the game, it's only one part of it. The real challenge is much larger. Because The Witcher 4 isn't simply trying to continue a successful franchise, it's trying to replace an iconic protagonist and follow one of the greatest RPGs ever made, and restore confidence in the studio that damaged its reputation with Cyberpunk 2077. But most sequels only have one mountain to climb, but The Witcher has 3 of them. But The Witcher 4 has a huge problem, and no, I don't think it's Ciri. In fact, the more I look into the discussion surrounding this game, the less I think Ciri matters at all. Because every time people talk about The Witcher 4, something strange happens. The conversation never stays on The Witcher 4 for long, and sooner or later people start talking about Geralt. And then they start talking about The Witcher 3. And then somebody brings up Blood and Wine, and before you know it, everybody's talking about the game that came out more than 10 years ago. And honestly, I think that's where the real problem starts, because The Witcher 4 isn't fighting against Ciri backlash, it's fighting against the memory of The Witcher 3. And that's what the fight most sequels lose before they even begin. The funny thing is that nobody expected The Witcher 3 to become what it became. Back in 2015, people expected a good RPG, maybe even a great RPG, but I don't think nobody expected it to become one of the most respected games in the entire genre. And even today, whenever a new RPG releases, comparison starts immediately. How good are the side quests, or how good is the writing, or the character, and eventually somebody says, yeah, but is it as good as The Witcher 3? And at this point it's almost a tradition, and the game became more than a successful RPG. It became a benchmark. But with this creates a problem, because when the game reaches that level, the sequel stops being judged on its own merits, and it gets compared to the legend, and the legend are incredibly difficult to follow. And the best example of this is probably Geralt himself. Whenever people talk about Witcher 4, they almost always bring him up, not because they hate Ciri and not because they think she's a bad character. And funny enough, most fans actually like Ciri. The issue is that Geralt became bigger than the franchise itself. For nearly 20 years, players followed this character throughout 3 games, wars, and monsters and impossible choices. And at this point, Geralt stopped feeling like a protagonist and he became the identity of The Witcher. And that's why replacing him feels so significant, not because Ciri cannot carry the franchise, but because Geralt became one of those characters people associate with the entire series. And the same thing happens when people think of Kratos when they hear God of War, or Master Chief when they hear Halo, or even Ezio when they hear Assassin's Creed. And the moment the character reaches that level, moving on becomes difficult, not for the writers, for the audience. But here's the thing, I still don't think Geralt is a real problem, because if Geralt came back tomorrow, the biggest challenge facing The Witcher 4 would still exist, and people would still compare it to The Witcher 3, the game would still be expected to live up to one of the most beloved RPGs ever made. And that's where the things start becoming almost impossible. Because after more than 10 years of waiting, players aren't simply hoping for another Witcher game. They're expecting something extraordinary. They want a world that feels bigger, and they want the quests that are just memorable, and characters they'll remember for years, and they want all of this while starting an entirely new chapter for the franchise. The expectations just keep growing, and every trailer, discussion, or ads adds more hype, and eventually people stop imagining a real game. They start imagining the perfect one, and no developers can compete with perfection because perfection doesn't exist. The crazy part is that CD Projekt has made the situation even harder for themselves, because if The Witcher 4 was releasing right after The Witcher 3, the expectation would already be high, but now Cyberpunk exists. And whether people like it or not, Cyberpunk changed the way players look at CD Projekt Red. Now before anybody starts typing angry comments, Cyberpunk today is generally a good game, and most people agree on that. And with all the updates, the game recovered in a way very few games ever have. But the launch still happened, and people remembered. That's the important part. Before Cyberpunk, CD Projekt felt untouchable. They were the studio that made The Witcher 3, and maybe players trusted them completely. Now there is more skepticism, more caution, and more doubt, which means The Witcher 4 isn't just trying to follow Witcher 3, it's also trying to prove that Cyberpunk was a mistake, was a warning, and that's a lot of pressure for a single game. And honestly, this is why I find Witcher 4 so fascinating, not because of Ciri, not because of Geralt, and not because of the graphics or the combat, but because of the position it's in. Very few games ever have to deal with something like this. The Witcher 4 has to convince players to move on from Geralt, and has to follow one of the most celebrated RPGs ever made. And it has to rebuild confidence in the studio whose reputation isn't quite what it used to be. That's a massive challenge, maybe even an impossible one. Because the real enemy of The Witcher 4 isn't Ciri, it isn't Cyberpunk, and it isn't even Geralt. The real enemy is The Witcher 3 itself, not the game, the memory of it, and the memories are very hard to beat. So maybe the real question isn't whether The Witcher 4 can replace Geralt, maybe the real question is whether any sequel could ever live up to what people expect from it. And so let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you on the next one.